The smell of stale coffee and old grease was the first thing that hit me, a thick, cloying perfume that was a world away from the filtered air of my corner office overlooking Rio de Janeiro. I was Frank, but not the Frank Rossi who ran a multi-million real enterprise that included a small, struggling chain of diners. Today I was Frankie, a man down on his luck, with a fabricated story of unemployment and a desperate need for a job, any job. I was going undercover in my own business, a drastic, perhaps theatrical, measure to understand why this specific diner, my late father's first and most beloved establishment, the Copacabana Café, was inexplicably failing. My father had built his empire starting with this single, humble diner. It was his legacy, a place he spoke of with a nostalgic reverence that I, a man of balance sheets and profit margins, had never truly understood. After his passing, I had maintained the chain as a tribute to him, but from a distance, managing it through a corporate structure of regional supervisors and accountants. But for the last year, the Copacabana Café, once a cash cow, had been bleeding money. My supervisors had no answers, so I decided to find them myself, to see my father's legacy from the ground up, starting from the very bottom. The manager, a gruff, overweight man named Carl with a perpetually sour expression, hired me on the spot as a dishwasher and busboy. He didn't even look at my fake resume. He just grunted, pointed to a stack of dirty dishes, and told me the pay was minimum wage, cash, under the table. The kitchen was a chaotic, sweltering hell of clattering plates, shouting cooks, and the constant, deafening roar of the industrial dishwasher. It was immediately clear that this was a place where corners were cut and morale was a foreign concept. I was no longer a CEO. I was an invisible cog in a broken machine. It was during my third hour of wrestling with a mountain of greasy plates that I first saw her. Her name was Maria. She was a waitress, moving through the chaotic dining room with a pained, careful grace that seemed out of place. She was efficient, her smile for the customers genuine but tired, her eyes holding a deep, weary sadness. But it was her left hand that caught my attention. It was swollen, bruised, and crudely wrapped in a stained, beige bandage. She carried the heavy trays of food with her right hand, her left arm held stiffly at her side, a clear, silent testament to an injury she was refusing to acknowledge. In that moment, I saw her not as a person, but as a data point, a symptom of the diner's deeper malaise. An injured employee, a hostile manager, cash being handled under the table. It was all part of the puzzle I was here to solve. Her resilience was admirable, in a detached, academic sort of way, but my focus was on the numbers, on the inefficiency, on the mysterious financial drain. I had come to investigate a failing business, not the quiet, desperate struggles of a single, injured waitress. I had no idea that her story, and the secret of her broken hand, would ultimately be the only answer that mattered. The next few days were a brutal, humbling education in the reality of a minimum wage life. My body ached in ways I hadn't thought possible, my hands raw and stinging from the constant immersion in hot, greasy water. The work was relentless, thankless, and paid just enough to make you question the value of your own existence. I saw my employees, the people who had been nothing more than names on a payroll spreadsheet, as they truly were, hardworking, exhausted human beings, trapped in a system that was designed to extract the maximum amount of labor for the minimum amount of compensation. My observations of the manager, Carl, quickly confirmed my suspicions. He was a petty tyrant, a man who ruled his small fiefdom with a mixture of verbal abuse and quiet, systematic theft. I watched him berate a young cook for using too much cheese on an omelet. I saw him sign for supply deliveries and then discreetly load a case of expensive steaks into his own car. And I watched, several times a day, as he would take a cash payment from a customer, ring up a "no sale" on the old-fashioned register, and slip the bills directly into his pocket. The reason for the diner's failing profits was no longer a mystery. It was standing in the middle of the kitchen, shouting at a busboy for being too slow. I tried to speak with Maria about her hand, making small talk during a rare quiet moment in the kitchen. She was guarded, her responses brief and evasive. "I just fell," she said, her eyes not meeting mine. "It's just a sprain." But the deep, purple bruising visible beneath the stained bandage told a different story. I asked her why she didn't see a doctor or take some time off. She gave a short, bitter laugh. "And how would I pay for that?" she asked. "A doctor's visit is half a week's pay. And a day off is a day my son doesn't eat. So I work. It's as simple as that." My detached, businesslike investigation was becoming increasingly, uncomfortably personal. I witnessed her struggle in high definition. One afternoon, during the chaotic lunch rush, her injured hand finally gave out as she was carrying a heavy tray of plates. The tray tilted, and a cascade of ceramic and half-eaten food crashed to the floor. The entire diner fell silent. Carl stormed out of the kitchen, his face a mask of purple rage. He didn't ask if she was okay. He screamed at her, in front of the entire dining room, telling her that the cost of the broken plates would be coming directly out of her tips for the week. I watched her, my heart pounding with a helpless, unfamiliar anger. I saw her face crumble, the humiliation of the moment, the sheer injustice of it all. But she didn't cry. She simply grabbed a broom and dustpan from the service station and began to sweep up the mess, her movements stiff with a quiet, steely dignity that was both heartbreaking and immensely powerful. In that moment, my mission changed. This was no longer about profit margins or my father's legacy. It was about her. It was about the profound, systemic failure that was happening under my own roof, a failure I was now, as the owner, completely and totally responsible for. In the days that followed, I made a concerted effort to earn the trust of the staff. I stopped being the silent, withdrawn dishwasher and started being a teammate. I helped the cooks with prep work during the lulls, and I made a point of helping Maria whenever I could, discreetly taking the heaviest trays from her station and carrying them to the tables, an act that earned me a small, grateful smile from her and a suspicious glare from Carl. I was slowly chipping away at the wall of mistrust that surrounded the downtrodden kitchen staff. I also began to spend more time talking to Betty, the head cook. She was a woman in her late 60s who had been working at the diner for over 30 years, a permanent, formidable fixture who had been fiercely loyal to my father. I didn't reveal my identity, but I would ask her questions about the old days, about the man who had founded this place. Her stories painted a picture of my father that I had never known, a man who was not just a brilliant businessman, but a kind, compassionate boss who knew the names of all his employees' children and would slip them a $20 bill when they were struggling. One afternoon, in the cramped, cluttered break room, Maria was trying to change the dressing on her hand. The cheap, generic bandage she was using had come loose, and she was struggling to rewrap it with one hand. "Here, let me help you," I offered, my voice gentle. She hesitated for a moment, then nodded, a silent admission of her pain and frustration. As I carefully, gently wrapped the new bandage around her bruised and swollen hand, I noticed a small, worn silver locket that she wore on a thin chain around her neck. It was an unusual design, a simple, smooth oval with a tiny, intricately carved hummingbird on its surface. And it was deeply, shockingly familiar. My heart began to beat a little faster. "That's a beautiful locket," I said, my voice sounding a little strained to my own ears. "It looks very old." She tucked it back into her shirt, a protective, almost unconscious gesture. "It was my mother's," she said, her voice soft with a reverence I had not heard before. "It's the only thing I have of hers. She was a waitress here, at this diner, a long time ago. She died when I was a baby." She looked at me, her eyes full of a history I was just beginning to comprehend. "I never knew my father. She said he was a kind man who worked here for a while, but then he was gone." A cold, electric shock went through me. The locket. The story. It couldn't be. But I knew it was. I had a matching locket, tucked away in a dusty jewelry box at home, a box filled with my mother's old things. It was a custom piece, one of only two my father had ever had made, a special gift for my mother on their 5th wedding anniversary. I had always assumed the other was a spare, a prototype. But now, the horrifying, impossible, and undeniable truth hit me with the force of a physical blow. This struggling, injured waitress was not just my employee. She was my father's secret daughter. She was my sister. I drove home from my shift in a complete daze, the city streets a blur of neon and rain that I barely registered. My mind was a chaotic whirlwind of shock, disbelief, and a dawning, profound sense of shame. My sister. This whole time, a sister I never knew existed had been serving coffee and cleaning up spills in a diner that should have been her birthright, while I had been living a life of privilege, completely oblivious. The carefully constructed, idealized image of my father, the man I had revered as a pillar of integrity and hard work, was beginning to crumble. The first thing I did when I got to my apartment was tear through the old boxes of my parents' belongings that I kept in the back of my closet. After 10 minutes of frantic searching, I found it, my mother's old, velvet-lined jewelry box. And there, nestled beside her pearls and a collection of old, sentimental trinkets, was the locket. It was identical to Maria's, the same smooth silver oval, the same intricately carved hummingbird. The confirmation was a cold, hard knot in my stomach. The story was true. My father had lived a secret life, a life that had produced a secret child. The next day at the diner, I sought out Betty, my heart pounding with a nervous, desperate need for the whole truth. I waited until we had a quiet moment alone in the dry storage room, and I showed her a picture of the locket on my phone. Her face, usually a mask of gruff, no-nonsense professionalism, seemed to age 10 years in an instant. Her shoulders slumped, and she let out a long, weary sigh. "I always knew this day would come," she whispered, her voice full of a sorrow that was decades old. And then she told me the story. She told me about Sophia, Maria's mother, a beautiful, vibrant young waitress with a sad story and a kind heart. She told me about the affair my father had had with her, during a difficult, lonely period in his marriage, a secret that he had been deeply, profoundly ashamed of. Sophia had gotten pregnant, and overwhelmed with shame and a fear of destroying his family, she had quit her job and simply disappeared, leaving no forwarding address. Betty told me that my father had spent years, and a small fortune, trying to find her, consumed with the guilt that he had carried to his grave. I looked out into the bustling dining room and saw Maria, my sister, refilling a customer's coffee cup, a tired but gentle smile on her face. Her struggle was no longer an abstract social issue, a symptom of a failing business. It was a family crisis. The broken hand, the poverty, the verbal abuse from a corrupt manager, it was all happening to my own flesh and blood, to the daughter of the man whose legacy I was supposed to be protecting. The weight of this new reality, of my father's sin and my own ignorance, was immense. My simple undercover mission had just become a profound moral obligation to right a wrong that was 30 years in the making. My focus shifted with a new, ferocious intensity. The mission was no longer about profit margins or rooting out a petty thief. It was about justice, for my sister and for the entire staff who had suffered under Carl's tyrannical and corrupt management. A simple firing would not be enough. Carl had been stealing from these people, from my father's legacy, for years. He needed to be exposed, to be held accountable not just by me, but by the law. My first priority was to gather irrefutable evidence of his crimes. Working with Betty, who had been a silent, resentful witness to Carl's schemes for years, we began to build our case. She knew where he kept his real records, a second, hidden ledger tucked away in a loose floorboard in his cramped office. At night, after he had gone home, we would carefully document the discrepancies, photographing the real cash earnings versus the falsified numbers he was reporting to corporate. We collected a mountain of evidence, falsified supply orders, records of cash transactions that were never deposited, a clear, damning paper trail of his systematic theft. But I also needed to help Maria directly, immediately. Her hand was not getting better, and her financial situation was clearly desperate. I couldn't reveal my identity to her yet. The shock would be too great, the questions too complicated to answer in the midst of our investigation. So, I took a large sum of cash from my own personal account, placed it in a plain white envelope, and slipped it into her locker before our shift started. Inside, I wrote a simple, anonymous note. "For your hand? From someone who sees how hard you work. You deserve a break." It was a clumsy, inadequate gesture, but it was the only thing I could do for my sister at that moment. The final piece of my plan was to get Carl on camera. A paper trail was one thing, but irrefutable video evidence of him stealing from the register would be the final, undeniable nail in his coffin. Still playing the part of Frankie, the concerned busboy, I spoke to Betty. "There's a lot of cash going missing," I said, my voice a conspiratorial whisper. "We should tell the owner. Maybe he could install a security camera." Betty, playing her part perfectly, agreed. I made a call to my own corporate security head, explaining the situation and instructing him to send a technician, posing as a cable repairman, to install a tiny, discreet camera with a perfect view of the cash register. The trap was set. We had the documents, we had a plan, and now we had a hidden eye, waiting to capture the final piece of evidence. The sense of impending justice was a powerful, heady thing. I felt a ruthlessness I had never known I possessed, a cold, clear focus that was driven not by a desire for profit, but by a fierce, protective love for a sister I had never known I had. Carl's reign of terror was about to come to a very public and very definitive end. A few days later we had it. Hours of crystal-clear video footage showing Carl pocketing cash from the register, not once, but dozens of times throughout his shifts. The evidence was absolute, undeniable. That same morning, Maria returned to work. Her hand was in a proper cast, set by a real doctor, and the dark circles of exhaustion under her eyes were noticeably lighter. She was still quiet, still reserved, but she moved with a new, less pained sense of self. She cornered me by the dish station, her eyes full of a confused, cautious gratitude. "The money in my locker," she whispered. "Was it you?" I just smiled and shook my head. "There are still good people in the world," I said, the lie feeling more like a deferred truth. The reckoning was scheduled for noon, the peak of the lunch rush. I wanted the entire staff, and the diner's loyal customers, to be a witness to the fall of the tyrant. At precisely 12 o'clock, 2 uniformed police officers, followed by my corporate lawyer and the head of my company's security, walked into the Copacabana Cafe. The diner, which had been buzzing with the chaotic energy of lunchtime, fell into a stunned, immediate silence. Carl, who had been barking orders at a line cook, turned, his face blanching, a deer caught in the headlights. I remained in my dishwasher's apron, a silent observer in the back of the kitchen, as the scene unfolded in the main dining room. My lawyer calmly and professionally informed Carl that his employment was terminated, effective immediately. The head of security presented him with a folder containing the mountain of evidence we had collected. And then, the police officer stepped forward and informed him that he was under arrest for felony theft and embezzlement. They read him his rights, handcuffed him, and led him out of the diner in front of the entire staff and a room full of gawking customers. The reaction from the staff was a slow, dawning wave of sheer, unadulterated joy. There were tears, there were hugs, there was a spontaneous round of applause as the police car pulled away. It was a moment of liberation, of a regime of fear and exploitation coming to a sudden, dramatic end. In the midst of the celebration, I quietly gathered the entire staff in the kitchen. They all looked at me. Frankie, the quiet dishwasher, with a new, questioning respect. They knew I had been a part of this, and they wanted answers. I took a deep breath, and for the first time in my own diner, I told them the truth. "My name is not Frankie," I began, my voice clear and steady. "My name is Frank Rossi. My father built this diner. And I am the owner." A collective gasp went through the small crowd. Their faces were a mixture of shock, confusion, and a dawning understanding. "I came here to find out why this place was failing," I continued. "And I found out that it wasn't the diner that was failing, it was being failed. And for that, for what you have all endured under my watch, I am profoundly and deeply sorry." Then, my eyes found Maria's, and my expression softened. "And I found something else," I said. "Something I never expected." Later that afternoon, after the excitement had died down and the diner had closed for the day, I sat down with Maria in one of the worn vinyl booths. The room was quiet, the only sound the gentle hum of the refrigerators. The air smelled of cleaning solution, the fresh scent of a new beginning. I slid the silver locket, my mother's locket, across the table towards her. She looked at it, then at the identical one around her own neck, her expression a canvas of dawning, impossible belief. And then I told her everything. I told her about our father, about the affair, about the secret he had carried, and about the family she had never known she had. Her reaction was a quiet, seismic shock, a complete reordering of her entire world. There were tears, not of sadness, but of a profound, overwhelming confusion and a lifetime of unanswered questions finally finding a home. The man whose absence had defined her entire life was not just a name in a story. He was a real person, the founder of the very place where she had worked so hard to survive. And I, the man who had worked beside her in the kitchen, who had helped her rewrap her broken hand, was not just a kind stranger. I was her brother. I did not just offer her a story and an apology for our father's absence. I offered her a birthright. My father left this diner to me in his will, I explained, my voice full of a conviction I had never felt before. But I know now that was a mistake. He didn't know you existed. If he had, he would have wanted you to have your share. This place, this legacy, it's not just mine. It is ours. I offered to make her a full, equal partner in the Copacabana Cafe, to give her not just a job, but ownership, a tangible piece of the legacy that had been denied to her for her entire life. Months have passed since that day. The diner, now under our joint management, has been transformed. It's been renovated, the old, worn-out equipment replaced, the walls painted a bright, cheerful yellow. But the biggest change is in the atmosphere. The staff is happy, well-paid, and treated with the respect and dignity they deserve. It is once again the place my father had created, a place of warmth and community. I am no longer a distant CEO, managing from a spreadsheet. I am a hands-on partner, working alongside my sister, learning the business from the ground up, the way my father had. I came to this diner searching for lost profits, a man disconnected from his own legacy. I found a lost sister, a family I never knew I had, and in doing so, I found the real meaning of my father's work. I learned that a business is not just about numbers on a page, it's about the people who pour their lives into it every single day. The most valuable inheritance my father left me was not a chain of diners, but a sister whose strength, dignity, and resilience are the true testament to his complicated, and profoundly human, heart. We walk through the world every day, interacting with strangers who serve us our coffee, who clean our offices, who work in the kitchens of our favorite restaurants. But how often do we truly see the person behind the uniform? What hidden histories, what quiet struggles, what secret connections are living and breathing all around us, just waiting to be discovered? Tell me a story in the comments below about a time a stranger's story changed your perspective. Your story is a powerful reminder that we are all more connected than we think. If this story made you look at the world a little differently, subscribe, and share it with anyone who believes in the power of a second look.